From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
A sponsor of this festival since it started, and of course on behalf of the Library of Congress. I should tell you that we are, the Library of Congress is taping this for its website and for its archives, so please be mindful of this as you enjoy the presentation. I guess don't take your clothes off or anything like that. It's not often that someone decides in preschool what he wants to be when he grows up, sticks with that plan through elementary school, perseveres through junior and senior high, and then focuses on that goal all the way through college. But that's exactly what our next speaker did. Since the days when he drew pictures for his sisters, Steven Kellogg knew that he wanted to be an illustrator. He went to the Rhode Island School of Design. He won a fellowship to study in Florence, Italy. Today, he's a prolific illustrator, perhaps best known for Pinkerton, a misbehaving dog who's featured in several of his books. In my house, with my two daughters growing up, it was, "Is your mama a llama?" Or, as my slightly superior mother-in-law always pronounced it, "Is your mama a llama?" That was the staple of bedtime reading. There was something about that baby llama, the expressiveness of the face, the sensuousness of that coat, that made me want to run my fingers through the fur. Steven Kellogg has illustrated close to 90 books. His most recent title is The Pied Piper's Magic. Please give a big National Book Festival welcome to Steven Kellogg.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be back here again at my 4th National Book Festival, to be part of this wonderful celebration of teachers and librarians, moms, dads, authors, illustrators, and especially kids, to bring kids and their books together. This National Book Festival is truly a wonderful, wonderful event, and I hope it's going to be an annual event far, far into the future, so that you kids, when you're grown up, can bring your kids to the National Book Festival. I had a lot of fun in line autographing books earlier, because I've been doing this so long that I had adults coming through and they said, "You came to my school 25 years ago, and here's the book that you autographed for me, and here's my little boy and my little girl, and now will you sign it for them?" So you can really keep these things going if you try, so let's all try to keep the National Book Festival going for generations. As Bill mentioned, I have loved books since I was a little boy. I loved making up stories for my two younger sisters, and I dreamed someday of being an author and an illustrator of books for kids. And since I became a grown-up, I published about 110 books. I've traveled all over the country to all 50 states, to thousands of wonderful schools and libraries and bookstores and colleges, telling people how much fun it is to write and illustrate and share stories, and urging them to write and illustrate and share stories of their own. Because I tell the kids that every single one of them is a storyteller. Inside each and every person under this beautiful big tent, there are special, wonderful stories that no one's ever told before and no one could ever tell again. Those stories are a very important part of who you are as a person. And if you write your stories down, you're an author. If you make pictures to go with your stories, you are an illustrator. And it's amazing to think that in every country, culture, civilization, society, tribe, all the way back through time, people have felt compelled to share stories, to reach out to each other with their stories. Stories build bridges between people. They bond them together. They help them to understand, appreciate, trust, and care about each other. And so we keep our stories alive, the myths and the legends from long ago civilizations, and we enjoy them today as much as people did hundreds or thousands of years ago. Now, when I visit schools and libraries, kids say, "Yeah, but how do you get an idea for a book? How do you know what to write about? Where do your ideas come from?" And the answer is, you write about something that's very special to you, something you care about, something you want to share, something you want to communicate. I tell the kids to put as much feeling into your story and pictures as you possibly can. I tell them one of the feelings I wanted to deal with, one of my very first books, came from something I remembered when I was a little boy. When I was a kid, I used to really love animals, and I still do. When I was a little boy, I wanted a pet very, very badly. I wanted something alive that I could love and hug and feed and take very good care of, something of my very own. But my mom and dad didn't agree with me. My mom said animals belong in the forest or in the jungle, maybe in the zoo, but definitely not in the home. Well, when I grew up, I remember that feeling of wanting something alive that I could love and hug and feed and take very good care of, something of my very own. And I put that feeling into a story, into a book I called Can I Keep Him? Can I Keep Him? A story about a little boy named Arnold. In this story, Arnold wants a pet very, very badly. There's another character in this story. It's Arnold's mom. In this story, Arnold's mom doesn't want a pet very badly at all. So through this story and through these illustrations, I can share my long ago feeling with boys and girls, moms and dads, teachers and librarians all over the country, and indeed all over the world. Because here's Can I Keep Him in French, for boys and girls in France to read. Here's Can I Keep Him in Norwegian, for boys and girls in Norway to read. And here's Can I Keep Him in Japanese, for kids in Japan to read. I think even from part way back in this big room, you can see this book's printed in an entirely different alphabet. So through these books, through the language of feeling, which is what art is, I can reach out, communicate, and share with kids all over the country, all over the world, a side of my work that is very special to me. Now, when I finally grew up, I could have any animal in the world I wanted, and I may have somewhat overcompensated for my real or imagined sense of childhood deprivation, because I chose, in league with my wife Helen, the largest, the craziest, the nuttiest, the wackiest, the most outrageous breed of dog there is, a Harlequin Great Dane. My wife Helen and I answered an advertisement in the newspaper for puppies. And we went to look at these little puppies that were advertised in the newspaper. And they were really cute puppies. They were really funny. They were white. They had big black spots. They had pink ears and pink noses. Each one of these puppies was about the size of a football and resembled a pudgy little piglet. And we played with the puppies and we got to like them better and better and better. We said, let's take one of those puppies home. We'll turn it into a pet and we'll name our new puppy Pinkerton. Well, we brought little Pinkerton home, and Pinkerton hit our family like an artillery shell, like a bomb. Pinkerton was crazy, he was stubborn, he was perverse. Pinkerton did everything backwards. In no time flat, he became enormous. He turned our family into total chaos, and the house into a complete mess. As his months of puppyhood dragged into years, things got worse and worse. It occurred to me more than once, this dog represented my mother's revenge. But finally enough time passed in which we learned to adapt our lifestyles to Pinkerton's. Slowly we learned to march to the beat of Pinkerton's drum. Gradually we learned to understand Pinkerton. And then we really grew to appreciate Pinkerton. And then before we knew it, we all had to admit that in spite of ourselves, we had all grown to love Pinkerton. He became a very beloved, a very special member of the family, and I thought, I'd like to share Pinkerton with moms and dads, teachers, librarians, and kids all over the country. I could put Pinkerton into a story. I could write a book about Pinkerton. And to give the kids a feeling for what it was like to raise a wonderful, wacko, insane Great Dane like Pinkerton, I will call his book, Pinkerton, Behave! Well, after Pinkerton Behave was published, I got a great big surprise, because I'd always thought that Pinkerton was a very special dog, a very unique dog. There were no dogs in the world like my crazy Pinkerton. But suddenly I started getting lots of letters from kids and moms and dads and teachers and librarians, and they said, your Pinkerton is exactly like my Chihuahua. Or exactly like my Cocker Spaniel. Or exactly like my little mixed breed dog. Or exactly like my German Shepherd. And some people wrote letters and they said, your Pinkerton is exactly like my son. Or, your Pinkerton is exactly like my husband. I was amazed to find out how many 2- and 4-legged kindred spirits of Pinkertons were bounding around. And people said, write more books about Pinkerton. So I looked around my house for another idea. I also had a wonderful old cat. A wonderful old cat who could occasionally be a moody old cat. And her name was Secondhand Rose. Rose was born in a woodpile in the Catskill Mountains of New York State over 35 years ago. Some friends of ours were out for a hike in the forest. It was winter, the snow was falling, and our friends were far from any farm or house or town. And suddenly, in the middle of the dark, silent winter forest, our friends heard a strange cry that seemed to be coming from inside a rotting woodpile. And they went to look at the woodpile, and there they found, to their amazement, a tiny orange kitten. A little orange kitten, only 5 or 6 weeks old, all by itself, with no mother, no brothers and sisters, no owner, no one to take care of her. And our friends were afraid the kitten would die alone in the woodpile in the middle of the dark, silent winter forest. And they said, let's bring her back to our apartment and we'll turn her into a pet. But this kitten was a wild thing. She'd never been in an apartment before. She'd never seen a person before. When they got her inside, she began to thaw out. And she realized where she was frightened. She was scared. She was terrified. And she freaked out. And she scratched and she bit and she fought and she hissed. She started ripping their apartment to pieces. Finally, our friend said, there's only one family we know that can deal with this wild orange kitten, and that's the Kellogg's. And they called us up on the telephone. They said, will you please adopt this wild orange kitten? Well, we agreed that we would. We brought her to our house. We named her Secondhand Rose. And we had Rose for 25 years. But sometimes Rose could revert to being a wild thing. She could be grouchy. She could be pushy. She could be bossy. She could be tough. Underneath all that, we quickly grew to realize that Rose had at least a small, dark heart. And if we worked very, very hard, we could find a place for ourselves in Rose's small, dark heart. And when we did, we realized that Rose was an amazing cat. An extraordinary cat. A brilliant cat, a fabulous cat. And before much time passed, we all had to admit we had grown to love Rose just as much in her own way as we had grown to love Pinkerton. But there was no room in that small, dark heart for one member of our family, and that was Pinkerton. Rose and Pinkerton had a terrible relationship, so I thought, I'll write an illustrated book about that. And I'll call that book A Rose for Pinkerton. And then I got more letters, and people said, write more books about Rose and Pinkerton together. So I did a third one called Tally-Ho Pinkerton, an adventure for Rose and Pinkerton to share. Then I thought, wouldn't it be fun to do a book about Pinkerton and dinosaurs? So I did one called Prehistoric Pinkerton, the fourth book of the Pinkerton series. And then one of my granddaughters, whose name is Amy, came into my studio one day, and Amy said to me, Grandpa Steve, I love Pinkerton, and I love penguins. I want you to write an illustrated book about Pinkerton and penguins and dedicate it to me. So I went to work thinking about penguins and researching penguins and writing about Pinkerton and penguins over and over and over again, because I never get my ideas for stories just right the first time. I have to rewrite them dozens of times, sometimes hundreds of times. But at last I came up with A Penguin Pup for Pinkerton. A Penguin Pup for Pinkerton, a story about Pinkerton and penguins dedicated to my granddaughter Amy, the fifth book in the Pinkerton series. But I have to confess to you, I have so much fun writing and illustrating books for kids, and I have so much fun remembering Pinkerton and what a great friend he was, that I sneak him into the backgrounds of almost all the books I write and illustrate. You're going to find Pinkerton hidden in the backgrounds of some of my tall tales. You'll even find him very well hidden in my very newest book called The Pied Piper's Magic. In fact, a couple of kids have written to me and said, Pinkerton is not in that book. I said, actually, he is. There's a few books where he doesn't appear. Is Your Mama Llama, Chicken Little, Come Back Cat, but he is hidden in the background of the Pied Piper's Magic. So a couple of kids went back and they looked together and they wrote back, we were wrong, Mr. Kellogg, we found Pinkerton. So see if you can find Pinkerton in the background of the Pied Piper's Magic. One of the things I'd like to do before we say goodbye is to show you how I begin a book, how I start to put a book together in my studio, which is located in an old yellow barn on the shores of Lake Champlain. Sharing a story is one of the most magical and special things we could do. So I want you to imagine this is a great big book opened up here, and we are one large lap. And we are sitting together, and open on our lap is this great big book And I'm going to start a story that I wrote and illustrated a long time ago. Share with you the opening of the story called The Island of the Skog. Now, as the Island of the Skog begins, it starts off in a way that I wanted to bring something really exciting and fun right to the first page to capture the kids' attention. So I thought, let's start off with a holiday. Let's start off with a party. Let's start off with National Rodent Day. National Rodent Day. And all the mice in the neighborhood turn out for a great big party in Jenny's clock, in the old antique shop where Jenny lived. And Hannah and Wooster and Louise all came to the party, and so did Bouncer and his buddies from the bowling alley. We can always tell Hannah because she wears a great big flower in her hat. Hannah and Wooster and Louise all came to help Jenny celebrate National Rodent Day in the old clock, in the antique shop where Jenny lived. And so did Bouncer and his buddies from the bowling alley. But they all arrived shaking after a narrow escape from the butcher's cat. The old butcher's cat had laid in wait for those mice, and he ambushed them on the way to the party. He leaped out at them. They had a terrible chase up and down the streets and alleys. And those mice just barely made it to Jenny's clock in the old antique shop with their lives. Well, when Jenny saw her friends and her neighbors burst through the door of the old clock, they were shaking with fright. They were babbling about the butcher's cat and the terrible chase they had had. Well, Jenny realized they were in no mood for the jolly National Rodent Day party she had planned. And Jenny knew that unless she did something drastic to cheer things up, her National Rodent Day party was going to be a terrible flop. So Jenny decided not to serve the meat and potatoes and vegetables that she had cooked for the main part of the meal. And Jenny decided she would cheer things up by wheeling in the dessert right away. Hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce, she announced. And through the door came Jenny wheeling this spectacular dessert. It had candles flaming, had National Rodent Day flags flying, had marshmallows and strawberries and raspberries and hot fudge sauce dripping down the sides. When Jenny's friends and neighbors saw that beautiful cake, they forgot all about the butcher's cat and the terrible chase they had had. They burst into great big smiles. They settled themselves around Jenny's table, and they dug into that terrific dessert. They were having a great time talking about National Rodent Day, asking for second and third helpings of hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce. But meanwhile, the old butcher's cat had slipped in with the delivery boy. The old butcher's cat slipped into the antique shop, and he heard those mice laughing and giggling and talking and asking for second and third helpings of hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce. And the old butcher's cat took one great leap across the floor. He flattened his paws against that old clock, and he knocked Jenny's clock right off the shelf. And the front part of that clock, where you wind it, swung open, and out stumbled Hannah and Wooster and Louise. Out came poor Bouncer and his buddies from the bowling alley. Out came Jenny head over heels. And on top of Jenny came her table and her chairs and her china and her silverware. And on top of everybody and everything came the hot marshmallow cheesecake with raspberry fudge sauce. And everybody and everything in poor Jenny's life went crashing to the floor below. Well, the old butcher's cat was trying to grab those mice, and the mice were trying to get themselves unglued from the dessert. They were racing up and down the aisles of the antique shop, shrieking with fright. Well, fortunately, the delivery boy heard all the ruckus. He came running in, and he picked up the butcher's cat just as the mice barely escaped to the basement. Well, by this time, Jenny realized that her National Rodent Day party was a terrible flop. All of her friends and her neighbors were scared out of their wits. Some of them were in tears. Here's poor Hannah. She has only one petal left in the flower of her holiday hat. And Hannah says, "A German shepherd got Granny last night. We should stay in our own holes. But I'm tired of living in a hole," said Jenny. "Me too," cried Bouncer, who you remember was the captain of the Rowdies bowling team. And Bouncer said, "Let's fight for freedom. We'll be soldiers, rough riding rowdies. I'll be the general and commander-in-chief." Well, the rowdies, like the rest of those mice, were sick and tired of being pushed around and picked on and bullied by all the mean, tough animals in the neighborhood. And they started marching angrily up and down the basement. But suddenly Jenny cried, "Wait, I've got a better idea." And Jenny pointed up the basement stairs into the main part of the antique shop, and all those little mice gathered around to see what Jenny was pointing at. And this is what they saw. At the top of those stairs, high on the shelf, the old antique dealer had brought into her shop just the day before a model of a sailing ship. Now, this little model sailing ship was exactly like those boats that Christopher Columbus had sailed to America. It had a watertight hull. It had a mast and sails and rigging. This little model sailing ship had windows and cabins below deck. Wyeth even had gun ports and cannons. It was exactly like a real old-fashioned sailing ship, but it was just the right size for a crew of mice. And Jenny said, "Let's take that little ship and we'll sail away. We'll find a peaceful island." Well, the rest of those mice all clapped and cheered. They loved Jenny's idea of sailing away from their dreary life in the holes and all their mean enemies and finding a warm and a beautiful tropical island where they could live in peace and in happiness. And when Bouncer saw how well the rest of the mice liked Jenny's idea, he said, "Okay then, I'll be ship's captain. Rowdies, you're my crew." Well, the rowdies were just as happy to be sailors as they were to be soldiers. Made no difference to them. The vote was unanimous. Those mice went racing back to their holes throughout the neighborhood. They gathered together all their tools, all their food supplies, all the stuff they thought they would need in a new tropical island home. And then, under cover of darkness, they met back in the antique shop and loaded all their stuff into the hold of that little ship. Well, you can imagine what a tough job it must have been for those tiny mice to get that model sailing ship down from the high shelf. And then they had to lower it out the window to the dark streets below. And then they began pushing and shoving that little ship along, down the narrow winding streets of the little town, over the curbs, around the corners, tiptoeing past the dark alleys where their enemies lurked. All night long they worked, pushing and shoving that ship along, until finally, just before dawn, just before sunrise, they reached the harbor, they reached the water. With one mighty shove, they launched the boat, and sure enough, that little ship floated. So we leave the mice there, with the golden sunlight flooding the harbor, as they struggle to raise the sails and set sail in search of the island of their dreams. And to follow them on that voyage, you have to go to your public library and check out this book called The Island of the Skog. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thanks to all of you for coming this afternoon, for sharing part of the story with me and starting off on this voyage to the island of Skog. I wish all of you joyful, exciting, exploratory voyages and all the books that set sail from the library shelves and every day. Enjoy the books, love the books, learn from the books, exult in the books, and come back next year to the National Book Festival, and hopefully we'll have a chance to go further on this wonderful voyage that we're all sharing. Thank you very much, and happy reading to all. Thank you. Thank you very much.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.